Hemant, welcome to Re-Enchantment.
Hey, thank you, Daniel.
So we met briefly several years ago, back when I was at the Humanist Hub in Boston. It was a community of humanists run by Greg Epstein. And I heard you give a talk at the Humanist Hub that really inspired me. You were talking about how, for one of your books, forgetting which one now, you
Yeah.
went to look at certain Christian churches to see what they were doing to attract followers and what can be learned from those examples and brought into communities like the Humanist Hub.
Yeah, the gist of that book was basically I'm an atheist. It was actually written for a Christian audience, but the idea was I've never been to church. I've never gone, I wasn't raised in one. I was raised in an Indian religion, but when you live in the US, I figure I should kind of know what they do. And the gist of the book was let's send me to a whole bunch of mostly evangelical, non-denominational Christian churches, a variety of them. So I went to mega churches. I went to small local churches. I went to a black church on the south side of Chicago. They're all promoting they're all promoting Christianity, but obviously different flavors of it. And it was tell us what you see, because a lot of these churches specifically say we want to reach out to non-religious people. They have seeker services
Mhm.
designed for people like me. So it's like, all right, well, I'm your target audience in a lot of these cases. So
Mhm.
let me visit your church. Let's see if you're doing anything that is actually appealing.
Mhm.
And in a lot of cases, the answer was no. But in some cases, it's like, if I believe this stuff, or if I ever came to the point where I believe this stuff, I can see why I might want to come back here.
Mhm.
Because they were doing some things that it's like, if you're looking for a community, if you're looking for purpose in your life, they gave it to you. And that is appealing. I can see why so many people want to go to these places. And more than anything else, I think the one thing it taught me is as an atheist, it is so easy to find other atheist activists who think I can logic your way out of religion. If I
Mhm.
just use these arguments or these Bible verses, I can get you to stop believing. Or like, let's have a debate and I'll convince you to leave. And the thing about those churches is, I'm sure there are many people who attend those churches, or in some cases lead those churches, who might have doubts, but they're not going to leave
Mhm.
because church isn't just about believing that stuff. It's about the people you're around, it's about how they make you feel. And if we don't have anything for a lot of these people to fall back on, even
Mhm.
as non religious people, like I can totally see why they would want to remain in those church settings.
Yeah, what were some of the things that you saw them doing, the kind of either activism or the services they provided?
Volunteering, for one. They provided opportunities for you to give money, not just to the church, but to good causes. They
Mhm.
provided a way for you to volunteer and work with each other as part of your church. They had small groups for you to not just be around other Christians, but be around other Christians who shared something in common with you, like a hobby that you took
Mhm.
seriously. So it was easy to make friends. Same reason a lot of people join clubs or sports in high school. Like
Sure.
you're a small fish in a big pond. You want to meet other people. They helped you do that. Honestly, if you got sick or you lost a job, you knew they would take care of you because they had the
Mhm.
resources to do it and they
Okay.
had the connections to help you out as well. That's just, and also, everything sucks right now in general. And this is one place where it was mostly positive when they were talking. These were
Mhm.
not fire and brimstone sermons.
Right.
These were like, what drives you? How do you get up in the morning? What do you do that makes your life worth living? It's not the lightweight televangelist sermons or Joel
Sure.
Osteen sermons you see on TV. It's not you're all going to hell if you don't believe this stuff. It was very much, yes, we believe in this stuff, so here's what we're going to do with it.
Mhm.
And here's how we're going to make the world a better place. Or here's how we're going to make your life a better life. Or you a better husband or a better parent or whatever it is. Again, personally, it doesn't necessarily connect with me right now. Like I would not join that stuff even if it was non-religious, to be honest with you. But I can totally see why it would be appealing to a lot of people.
Mhm. And I guess for so why even if it was non-religious, would you not want to join that? Do you find those things fulfilled in other ways in your life?
That's pretty much it. Like, if I know I can volunteer if I wanted to in other ways, it's not like I'm lacking for ways to fill up my time in ways that I find meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's that I already have that side of me fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I need it for my kids or my family or anything. That's not to begrudge anyone who is part of that or leads that, because again, those are good people too. So I once heard it put this way. There was an attempt at atheist churches. I know you've heard this before.
Sure.
And a lot of the versions of it, not individual groups, but versions of that didn't pan out. Because the thinking, I think, was if we just offer people everything they find at church, minus the Jesus stuff, maybe they'll stick around and we'll form those communities. And a lot of those things didn't pan out. And one of the theories I heard about why that's the case is you think that the sermons and the community itself, that's the glue that holds all this stuff together, and the mythology of it all is extra. Like, you don't need that. And that's not true at all. It's these people have something really fundamental and deep that is binding them together that allows them to do all the community building and volunteering and helping each other. You can't really have as big of a network and as strong of a community without that glue. And a lot of those quote unquote atheist churches really didn't focus on, this allergy starts fading. They didn't really focus on making sure that glue was strong. Because of course, all these people wanted to be part of something bigger. They wanted to do this in a non-theistic way, but they didn't really focus on it. It was very loose, maybe in some ways uncoordinated, but it just felt very haphazard. And so it's like, I definitely could see me not going back to that, not because any person was bad, just because I'm not giving up a lot of my weekend for this.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. That's something that I definitely noticed over the past few years, just involved in humanist communities and thinking about non-theistic communities. Community for community's sake is not a very strong reason to stick around.
Yeah. I say this as someone who, look, like, it's, again, I'm doing just fine, but it's not like I have a ton of friends that I'm hanging out with outside of that stuff. I joke about it a lot, like not having friends, but I'm fine. But the point is, I don't want to just go to some group where the one thing we all have in common is that we're atheists.
Sure.
Like, I don't really have an urge to hang out with everyone here.
Yeah.
There's got to be something more that is drawing me to these people.
Right. And I mentioned in previous episodes of this podcast that, like, atheism is a negation. We agree that we do not believe in this thing. That's the weakest bonding.
It's one answer to one question. Right. It's limiting. It doesn't tell you anything else. And if nothing else, I feel like what we've all seen a lot of in the past several years is, once you get beyond that, we diverge very quickly.
Sure. There's a lot of diversity among atheists, among secular people. And yeah, that's where, in terms of the new atheist movement online, had huge divisions because, suddenly people started realizing that, we're all atheists, but some people are very conservative, others are very progressive.
Right.
And
I don't know if you found this to be the case too. I certainly found this to be the case, where when I was younger, I felt like if I met another atheist, I felt like I knew something about them. I feel like I knew what they might have gone through in terms of leaving religion. I thought we shared that bond. Like, I understood them and I knew what their values were. And what I've experienced more, not that I didn't know it before, but I've experienced more in the past few years, is honestly, if all I know about somebody is that they're an atheist, I know very little about them. But now I feel like if I know who you're voting for, that would tell me more about who you are, what you stand for, what motivates you, than what your background is. So I feel like I am so much more sympathetic to progressive Christians, progressive Muslims, in a way that I wasn't before,
Mm.
and way less sympathetic toward conservative or like non-progressive atheists who I
Sure.
find myself having very little in common with. And
Yeah.
I didn't have that feeling before, especially when that new atheism stuff was happening
Mhm.
like a decade plus ago. I didn't feel that way at all. And that's certainly like politics seems to have replaced religion in my experience as a bigger motivator for so
Yeah.
many people I know.
Yeah, and it's a strong glue.
Yeah.
There's something. I was just in a previous episode was talking about the similarities between ideologies and religions, and I was thinking about ideologies as pseudo religions, that
Yeah.
in many ways they have many of the same characteristics.
Yeah. They drive you, they
They
motivate
drive
you.
you.
You think about it.
Yeah, it organizes society.
Yeah.
People, and also it gives. There are symbols. There are texts that you go back to, individuals that you point back to. It's like that was a
Yes.
great example of this ideology, and we want
Yeah.
to emulate that. Yeah. So yeah, it's for many people, politics is now one of those driving forces.
Yeah, and I feel like I have no desire to debate religion with anybody. And I get those requests online a lot from people who want to fight or argue about something religion related. And
Mhm.
it's like, I didn't really do debates before, but I really don't care.
Mm.
Like, I know it's the thing I do all the time. I know I write about atheism all the time, but like, if you're not already on my side with the atheism thing, I'm really not going to go out of my way to try to convince you that I'm right. I want to know more about what you stand for. And if
Mhm.
our values are aligned, it's like, what? Then the religion thing isn't that important to me.
So okay, I want to ask you a question then, because
Yeah.
you know, in looking at the Friendly Atheist, which is,
Yeah.
for those that don't know, that's your blog, your online presence, and you also have a podcast, the Friendly Atheist
Yeah.
podcast. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but you often talk about politics and you often talk about religion, but I get the sense that it is a more, I guess, I get a more aggressive tone there.
Sure. Like, friendly, I've joked about this before. Like, it's not because I'm friendly, it's because I know too many really nice atheists. So when I had the website's name is Friendly Atheist because I'm forcing you to say the two words together. But you're right. Like, in terms of things that make me genuinely mad at this point, I mean, it's not that people believe in God, it's that people use religion as like an excuse to do really horrible things. So it's
Sure.
no secret, I'm sure, where I lean politically here. But it's not just that people were conservative or that they like Donald Trump or something. It's that so often, and at least this is what I focused on,
Mm-hmm.
they used their faith or faith arguments to justify whatever policy positions he was taking that I found despicable. But again, it's not just they're like, this is the conservative argument, this is the Republican agenda. It's that this is the Christian thing to do.
Sure.
Whereas if Obama or Biden did the exact same thing, they would just use that excuse to just say the opposite.
Sure. And yet at the same time, there are those Christian groups, there are progressive Christians that, and actually I'll take a few steps back.
Yes,
when you were giving the talk, one of the things that you mentioned were stories about a certain church, I forget which one, where they were attracting a lot of young people, and they were basically cultivating a lot of activism. And so one of the things I remember you said, like the pastor came up one day.
If I remember it correctly, there was a church in Michigan that I visited. This is when I was visiting all those churches for the book I was writing. The pastor's name at the time was Rob Bell, who was I wouldn't necessarily call him progressive, but he was like the hip, cool pastor at the time, up and coming guy. And one of the things one of his associate pastors did, gets up, like they must have bought a rundown mall, converted like the food court to a church space. So like theater in the round in the middle where the pastor stood, chairs all around in a circle. And again, when I walked in there, part of what surprised me is like the crowd was like high schoolers or college age kids almost entirely. But one of the things the pastor gets up on stage, he's like, the front page of today's paper says something like 25% of our community in Grand Rapids, Michigan, very Christian area, is living below the poverty line. But he didn't stop there. He's like, what are we doing as a community to to fix this? And I thought that would be a rhetorical question. It was not. He's literally asking these people, what are we going to do to help these people and try to fix it so that poverty isn't a problem in their area? And it's not that they came up with a solution. They didn't fix homelessness, but everyone there seemed to think, yup, this is a thing we need to tackle because we're Christians and because we're obligated to do this. And again, like as an atheist, I'm sitting there thinking, why would I have a problem with any of this? Like, I wish more churches would do this sort of thing. Now, they do plenty of things I don't like. They hold plenty of beliefs I don't like. But when you see someone like William Barber, who has done like the Poor People's Campaign and fighting for progressive policies, and he doesn't hide his faith in any way, but he uses his faith as a way to motivate people to push for progressive policies. How on earth could I get upset at the guy for being religious or holding religious views? Because everything I see about how he puts his faith into action is that he's using it to actually improve society in ways that I want to see, maybe for different reasons. But like, why would I waste my time trying to tell anybody that this guy is wrong about something?
Yeah.
Like,
no,
why?
I was another thing that you were mentioning was maybe it was the same church, maybe a different one, but they would hand out envelopes to people filled with a certain amount of money.
Maybe this is a different church.
Different church. Which one was this church?
I don't remember the name. I think this is one of those things that a number of churches have done, but we always think of church. It's a place where you have to give money. You put money in the offering plate. They collect it. It goes to whatever it is the church does, and that's often opaque. And in some churches, they kind of do this kind of gimmicky thing, but it's not bad, where they kind of said one day, hey, we're passing around the offering plate, but this time we have a bunch of envelopes in it. Inside is some money. Take one envelope. Don't cheat. Take one envelope. Inside, there might be $10. There might be 20. There might be 500. And we want you, like, honor system here. If you want it, keep it, whatever. But honestly, we want you to, there's a place on our website, go do something good with the money, pay it forward, help someone out, and tell us what you did with it so we could share those stories in church. And a lot of people did, and it's amazing what they did. Whether it's paying for gas for someone behind them in line, paying in a fast food drive-thru for whoever it covers behind them, or helping. Like, there were some real stories of helping people out who needed it. The stories were amazing. And the church's goal, besides let's get some publicity, because it's not a bad publicity stunt, is why do you need to wait for us to give you money to do this? $20 for a lot of people here. That's not a lot of money. You could do this sort of thing all the time. Let us start you off, but go do it. It's, again, the point is, we spend so much time as atheists arguing about the harm that religion causes. And again, there is definitely a valid point about doing the right thing for the right reasons. And that's something we might disagree on when it comes to religious stuff. But again, I think if those were the stories you heard about in church, overwhelmingly, I think it would make it a lot harder for atheist activists to do our job in the sense of trying to get people to stop believing this stuff. That's not a real problem because those things happen few and far between. And I could point to a countless number of examples of bad behavior. But it's like, okay, if that stuff is happening in these churches, why do you think people don't leave them? Like, they're not gonna leave.
So that's what, in part, that's what I liked that talk that you gave because, well, by osmosis from that, through you, I heard those stories and I did something very similar. I applied for a couple of grants and I got basically $2,000 along with like some donations from other people. And I created this thing. I called it Kindling for Kindness. I made 200 origami, like square envelopes, and I filled them with money, $5, $10, $20, and I hid them all around Boston and all around New Orleans, where I currently live. And I put a little note there, and I said, if you find this, spend this on whoever. You know, and I gave a couple of examples, and also I gave a little email that if
you did,
tell me what you did, and it was so heartwarming because exactly that, like One person gave to like a local women's shelter. One
Yeah.
person donated to their scholarship fund at their alma mater. Somebody gave to a
Oh,
homeless person, to the Boston Food Not Bombs program.
right.
And there were the actual monetary impact, though, is, as you pointed out, it's almost secondary, because
Right.
people are putting in $10-20 to whatever cause, but
Right.
hopefully in some of those people's heads, like, oh, this is something that I can do whenever. This is a nice thing.
Yes.
The feeling that I get of like doing this good thing, I can do that for myself with my own money.
And this is something I started working with a group called Foundation Beyond Belief years ago. It's an atheist charity group. But the idea is, we saw the guy who started it, Dale McGowan. I believe one thing that he noticed is that they do these surveys of who's more charitable, and you can organize it by religion. And it turns out Christians in general are more charitable. They give away more money as a percentage of their income compared to atheists. And part of me is like, well, they're giving it to church. That's not fair. Even if you take that out, though, even if you say, no, not giving to yourself or your community, but giving to others, religious people, by and large, and especially Christians, do give more money to those groups, any groups, than atheists do. And of course, if you dig into those numbers, part of the argument is they have a really good vehicle to donate, which is they're at church. And at church, you can raise money for various causes, and it's an easy way to do it. Whereas atheists, because we're lone wolves, if we give, and we do, but we do it on our own. We don't do it as a group. There's no peer pressure necessarily.
Sure, there's no peer pressure, and there's also every Sunday, nobody's telling you once a week, we have to be good people.
Yes.
And this is part of the thing.
And at church, kids and their families, they get into a habit of giving. And I'm not talking about tithes. You have to give a tithe. I'm saying, like, beyond that, they learn that, oh yeah, when I have the means to do it, this is what I ought to be doing. And that sticks with them, even if they're not necessarily part of that church later on. We have a hard time instilling that. Like, we hope atheists are good just because they're atheists. Like, you hope they become good people. But there is I don't know, if you don't go to church, and how do you learn how to do that sort of thing? How do you make that a habit unless parents or a community of some sort tells you this is a thing you should do? It makes you feel really good.
Yeah. So
like, that's a hard thing.
A question for you, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I would imagine that having a large platform of atheists getting these kinds of messages and telling these kinds of stories might be a way of instilling that in the atheist community. But I mean, I don't quite see many of those stories on your blog.
Yeah, no, it's fair. I occasionally do it when there's some sort of emergency, or there is a group like Foundation Beyond Belief. There are others that are doing that fundraising. They do it. It happens. It usually happens when there are big things going on. I feel like for the past several years, so much of my own focus has been on politics and things that are going wrong. So those are the stories that get me fired up and motivated. And again, this is less about how do I make atheism better than how do I show people that religion is not a virtue, because look at the harm it's causing. We see it every day. That said, there have been times when people take anger out on churches, where I've seen churches get graffitied. I've seen a church burn down from arson. And it's not that an atheist did it per se, but sometimes you do see like graffiti. The things that they write are like, God is dead, or it's a satanic thing. And again, part of me, and if you don't catch the culprit, you don't know if that's someone doing it for that motivation, or they thought that would be a clever thing to tag them with. I have raised money for those organizations and those churches at some times. But you're right. It doesn't happen that often. I think part of that is just the Trump stuff kind of sucked the energy out of all other stories. It's really hard to find a lot of stories that are not politics related these days. But that's kind of when opportunities come up, I do try to point to them. But right now it seemed like so many things were just sucking the energy out of the room for anything else. But you're right. It is a fair point that showing people, look at these atheist groups doing good things in the name of atheism. because I get emails that are saying like, here's a scholarship drive that this group gave. They gave scholarship money to people who were the first in their family to go to college, or wrote essays about why church-state separation is important, or decided they're going to get grant money to do amazing things in the name of skepticism or atheism. And one thing that I realized is I get a lot of those emails, and I don't write about them all, partly because in terms of writing them, they also don't get a lot of hits. That's a reality. No one reads those articles.
Yeah.
And so it's like, do I want to spend half an hour or an hour writing up that article if no one's going to read it, versus an article where if I spend my time, I know there'll be a payoff there. Not literally. I mean, people will actually read it. So a lot of those scholarship stories, I'm just like, that's awesome. Good for you. You're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily need me to tell the world it's also happening.
Sure. Much of the criticism, again, of the media cycle that the media focuses
too much on the wrong stuff.
It's
true. I mean, part of the thing, I'm not trying to make excuses about it, but now I'll make an excuse about it. When, like, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I did read more articles that were suggesting atheists were not charitable, atheists were not doing good. I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen a lot of those in recent memory. I honestly don't see a lot of articles suggesting atheists are bad people, other than ones that come from like right-wing evangelical Christians who suggest like, we're a Christian nation, you have to believe in God to be good. Honestly, but as a whole, I think if you're a kid in high school right now, you probably know someone who's not religious, and they're not bad people. I don't need to tell you that. Like, for the same reason that you don't see a lot of articles saying like, hey, being gay isn't that weird. But like, it's not weird, it's fine. You don't see those articles anymore because everyone kind of accepts that.
I guess the, what I'm interested in is like, there's a kind of, it may be that like there's a notion that, okay, well, atheists are just kind of, they're just like everybody else. But I wouldn't have done that origami money campaign unless if you hadn't said those things, I would never have thought about it, and I would have never have done it. And so there's something I think really powerful about saying those stories and inspiring people. And honestly, like a scholarship drive, I understand. I'm probably not going to read that article either.
Right.
But there's this Unitarian Universalist pastor who I listen to her podcast, Kim Crawford in the Arlington Street Church. She fills her sermons with stories. Really emotionally impactful ones. And oftentimes they are talking about charity. There was a few years back, somebody at a Kmart who around Christmas time just paid for someone who was struggling to buy the gifts for their children. She paid for him and for like a bunch of other people in line. And that caused a cascade of other people around the country doing the same thing. And I listened to that, and it's like, it makes it really just
gives you hope.
It gives you hope. And it gives you also the idea that, next time Christmas time comes around, I have another $50 in my pocket. I'm going to give it to a random person. If that idea is implanted, it's never going to happen.
That is true. I don't have a good answer to that. Like, I know what you're saying in terms of, part of this is I've been doing this for a long time, and it's like, who are you talking to? Is it always going to be a new audience? And I recognize that there are always people tuning in who were not tuning in before. And so sometimes I will write it feels like the same story again, because it's like, well, it's not the same people reading it this time around. And that applies to the good stories too, where it's like, if you share that, if you say what they're doing or what they did, someone's going to see it who never would have seen these stories otherwise. I will say there are sometimes it's easier to fire off a tweet saying, hey, look, here's a scholarship or something that is worth checking out, or the deadline is there, as opposed to an article. And I have found other vehicles to share smaller stories that might not get a lot of views on a website, but that I think are worthwhile, that you could share in other forms of social media and stuff. But also, I don't know, my mind I feel like it's been occupied by trying to put out big fires as opposed to building up bigger things. And it's not because those things aren't important. It's like, that's what I'm thinking about all the time. And I don't know. I don't necessarily feel like we have the luxury of saying, let's also do some nice stuff. Like the house is on fire. We need to put that out first. Then we can work on building it. I do agree with you, though. Like sharing those stories has its power. And no doubt, if I see a good story in a number of newsletters or roundups that I'm seeing, depending on the stories, like I'll click on those too, because it is nice to share good news, to see good people. Yeah. And so those stories are valuable. I feel like I have not seen a lot of these amazing types of stories when it comes to talking about atheism specifically.
Sure.
Like I used to see a bunch more of them. And I don't think it's because people aren't doing it as often. It's because like they just, okay, that's nice. You did something good. Good for you. And you don't see that coverage much anywhere.
Right. I think for me, actually, has to do with why I gravitate more towards the label of humanism as opposed to atheism. I went on Reddit and I looked at the atheist subreddit, and all it was. I mean, in tone, it was fairly similar in terms of like very political, focused, very much focused on what religion is doing wrong.
And I feel like even if it's not filled, even if the atheism subreddit isn't just young people who finally got out of religion, it certainly feels that way. Where like a lot of the top posts are generally, here's the worst thing happening in the name of religion, or here's something posted by someone who just left religion. And so it's like a handful of memes and arguments that it's like, I've heard it a million times in other forms.
Sure. Yeah. And I guess like that's where the stereotype of the angry atheist comes from, right?
Yeah.
And I would imagine also like I remember I was giving doing a workshop at a conference, and it was about secular spirituality in the notion of like when you go out on a walk to a lake, or you're walking alone in a cemetery, or you're breathing and you're thinking about your future or your past, like those are moments that you can consider spiritual moments. They have nothing to do with the supernatural. And I finished the workshop, and the woman came up. This woman came up to me and she said, "I came to this workshop partly out of spite, just to see like what kind of ridiculous things you were going to say about secular spirituality. But I'm really glad that I came, because for the last I think 2 years into the presidency of Trump's presidency, for the last 2 years, like I just haven't stopped thinking about politics, and this is the first time that I feel like I kind of relaxed."
And that's awesome. One thing that's come up is, if you ask me what atheists like are inspiring right now, I mean, the list that I would come up with honestly has to do with people who run for office with the label, with some non-theistic label.
And that is inspiring. That is
inspiring. And they don't make a big deal of the label. They just happen to be atheists.
Sure.
But they're running for office because that's the best way they know to help other people. And that wasn't even an option, like really, realistically, a decade, 2 decades ago. And so like, again, this is where, for me, the people what atheists are really doing the charity work, helping other people. There used to be, like you're saying, the spiritual type of people who are saying, I'm a humanist, I want to help other people, here's what I'm doing. I'm starting an organization, I'm launching a charity, I'm helping people with that charity. Those still exist. I mean, that's awesome, good. I have seen a lot more I personally, as a cynical person entirely, I find myself just like, I'm so glad these people are in office because they are doing so much good for so many people. And I mean, even this year alone, and this is with Greg Epstein, who you mentioned, who launched like the Humanist Hub in Boston. What was the big thing that he was working on over the summer? It was getting humanists politically active, and humanists for Biden, and saying, here's a coalition of people who happen to be non-religious, but we want to channel that energy into something productive and meaningful. And for us, the people who are involved in it, it's like, right now, it's getting someone like Biden into office and getting science and decent people in positions of power because all the charity stuff we're talking about, like even the things you're mentioning, I feel like a lot of it happened between those Obama years when it's like there isn't a one overarching, like you have the luxury of not thinking about politics when someone normal is in charge. Like there are political arguments, there is criticism, but it's like we can think about other stuff. And I was just thinking, like, I haven't read a book. Very few. Like I could count on one hand the number of actual books I have read in the past several years. I read magazine articles all the time.
Sure.
But it's one of those, like, I don't have the luxury, even I'm joking about your friend who said, I haven't not thought about politics in a couple of years. Like the idea of just going away somewhere and not thinking about something, that sounds great. And I can't do that. And it's the same reason I cover more politics, I think, than anything pro-atheism, I guess, like positive atheism.
So speaking on this subject,
yeah,
we've had the election. Knock on wood, things go smoothly through the inauguration, and we have a new president that is boring in the best way. What do you see? I mean, for yourself and also for atheists, for secular people, politically, what are we going to be doing now that we don't have to be putting out the huge fire in the White House?
So a couple things that I would like to see politically speaking. I mean, just take the pandemic, for example. Biden's already doing this, but rely on people who study this stuff for a living and take their advice and take it seriously. That's an example of, like, that's what I want in a secular government. I don't want anyone promoting atheism through the government. I want them to say, fine, you're all at the table. Let's make this work by listening to the people who know what they're doing. It's pushing for policies based on what the arguments are and the reasons are, not just political arguments for it. So sure, there's a lot of stuff I'd like to see politically in that sense. I will also tell you that I'm still waiting for final results to come in on a lot of races. There's like 30 statewide races that haven't been called yet. I think when all is said and done, the election that we just had has resulted in more elected non-religious people in state level and national office than we've ever had before. More state representatives, more state senators, one openly humanist congressman, and one who is on the verge of losing, but her race hasn't been called yet. But like, again, these are all people who, when they were campaigning, either said, I'm an atheist, I'm an agnostic, I am spiritual but not religious. Like they openly said, I am not religious, using whatever terminology they wanted. And as with like one or two small exceptions, it did not affect any of their campaigns.
That's fascinating.
It's totally fascinating. That never would have happened a while ago. Like, it's just to the point where, what are you going to attack these people on? Oh, being an atheist? Why don't you attack their policy positions? Or what are they doing with it? Because they're all, like, as one person said to me, she wasn't afraid to use the word atheist. She put it out there herself because she was like, if anyone asks me, tell me about the atheism. It's a personal choice I made after a long reflection on it. Now, let me tell you what I'm going to do for you when you elect me.
Sure. And that should be the actual thing that matters about an elected
it absolutely
politician.
should. And you know what? No one that I've seen has attacked her in any meaningful way for being an atheist. And she's an elected official. And this is just across the board. So it is super exciting to me that we have gone from, I'm an atheist and that drives me and I'm passionate about it and I want to help you become an atheist, which honestly, all the God delusion books and things like that is their purpose.
Right.
I want to make you an atheist. And now it's like, there are atheists out there. I don't think there's a lack of resources for anyone looking into it. So now what do we do with that?
Yeah.
And it's like, can you push for politics that do separate church-state separation, emphasize science and the methods used in science, and push for policies that actually try to create a heaven on earth? Because that's what we can do. I have seen that shift slowly happening. I mean, obviously, huge bumps along the road, but that is happening. That to me is just like, yes, that's where we need to be going, because we're the voices we need to hear right now. Not the religious voices that will use their faith to justify all kinds of atrocities. And by the way, for what it's worth, I have not seen any meaningful group of atheists that are pushing for conservative politics. That's just an interesting thing to me, because it's not like they don't exist.
Yeah,
They haven't made
exist.
any headway into conservative spaces despite trying to. Every one
Interesting.
of those, maybe 100 almost elected officials that we may end up having in office, every one of them is an elected Democrat or will be.
Wow. Huh.
Not a single exception.
That's fascinating, and maybe
Yeah.
it's because of the entanglement of Christianity and with the Republican Party.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that hurts both sides. You can't expand the tent when your purity test just gets smaller and smaller.
Sure. So, what, in terms of listeners, in terms of individual atheists that are listening to this, who want to promote science and politics and see more of these kinds of this shift happening, what can they think about? What can they do in the next 4 years?
I mean, the best thing to do would be get involved at a local level, because everyone, I mean, if you think about the Senate races, US Senate races we just had, they've earned crazy amounts of money in terms of fundraising, and maybe it paid off. Most cases, as we saw, it did not. But there's so many. I think I've read there are more than 500,000 elected offices in the United States. Wow. At every level. And all of us, I mean, I am a political junkie. I pay attention to several hundred of them. Congress, governors, things like that. Most people probably couldn't tell you who their city council members are, who their school board consists of. And here's the thing. Not only should you run for office, because it would be nice to have people who care about science and reason in those positions, but man, volunteer for those campaigns. Learn how they operate so that if you're not going to run, at least you can help people that you support run for office. Because, I mean, I used to think part of the issue is we can't get our voice out there. Atheists are such a minority that it helps to have books and websites and stuff like that out there. I feel like those resources are out there, and now it's, okay, well, how do I put this into effect? How do I put this into action? The way to do it is make sure you find local politicians or people running for those smaller offices that are down ballot and get no attention, and you go to the ballot booths to vote for president, and you're like, who are these people on my ballot? Help them out as much as you can. That's what I would urge. People who are atheists and activists, like, you don't, I mean, I'm sure this is not news to anyone listening. There aren't a ton of jobs as professional atheists out there, but atheists who use their values and their beliefs to push for ideas and beliefs, again, start off as a volunteer, get good at it, and keep working to emphasize that in positions of power. I feel like that has to be the next step as to what we do. And that's not saying those foundations and those groups are not important, but it's like we've spent so much time trying to get people to become atheists as a movement. And it's like, well, to what end? Who cares?
Sure.
Because, I mean, evangelicals, right-wing evangelicals, to their credit, figured this out, where it's like, we want people to adopt our faith, but for what reason? If we can't use the government to promote those policies we like just telling people to join our club is not enough. We need to do something with it. And they've been really, really good at it. And we're not. We're still new to that world. We need to get better, and it won't get better unless more people who care about this stuff get active. And there are more, we are seeing more opportunities for that, whether it's lobbying groups or political action committees. There are those for atheists. But get involved in local politics. And again, even better if you run for office. If you're in college or you just graduated from high school, you are old enough to run for office everywhere in the country. And very few people do it. There are some offices you need to be 25, but by and large it's 18. Go run. You're probably way better than some of the people who do get elected. And so it's like, all right, go do something with it.
Circling back to where we started, it's one thing to run for office and have an influence in the government machinery. But there are ways of changing things on your own and in your community, doing the kind of charity work, giving somebody those Christmas presents that they can't afford,
and those kinds of organizations. They're not always church-based, but yes, those organizations where you are giving back to your community, helping those who are less fortunate. yes, get involved with them or join any group like that, even if it is church-based, and figure out the gist of what they are doing, what you like about it. Because maybe you see that sort of thing and you're like, this is a wonderful thing we're doing, but maybe I don't get on board with the church aspect of it. Good. Once you learn how to do it, like you're saying, Daniel, go figure out how to do it yourself and make it even better and find a way to spread it in your own way with your own stamp on it, because that would be wonderful. But I think more than anything, the thing that bugs me is apathy, because most people don't care about anything, much less politics or charity or anything.
Well, maybe that's where the a need for a strong glue, a strong, inspiring glue.
Take that passion and run with it. Don't sit around and do nothing. Find a way to like release that energy in whatever capacity you're going to have it. Because again, there's way too many people who do nothing. And if you're active and you're involved, if you're the sort of person who would listen to this podcast or watch this podcast, you care. So go do something with it. That would be a wonderful way to, I mean, we're talking about finding a purpose.
The question, and the question is what to do. And that's I think where more stories of like, well, this person over here did this awesome thing. You can do that too.
Yeah. Look for it. And again, if you don't see it, start your own way to do that stuff, because it's never going to be perfect on launch. You get better at it. You learn from it. And you like, I always enjoy the articles where I see atheists doing that sort of stuff, but I've been surprised at how few I've seen emphasize the atheism thing, because like, we don't need to. I mean, I feel like there's less of a need to prove atheists can do this sort of thing. We're just doing it. And so many people don't get credit or ask for credit. They're just like, all right, this is my way to help. Yeah. And that is awesome.
All right, Hemant, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Daniel. I appreciate it. This is fun.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to reading more of the Friendly Atheist, and maybe hearing about some fun stuff.
I will do my best.
Some positivity.
I will do my best to include more positive stuff.
I hope you inspire me again, like you did before.
Fair point.